The year was 2147 when the massive ships appeared in Earth's sky and changed everything. Forever humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now they had their answer in the most humiliating way possible. The Concord of 12 species arrived not as conquerors, but as observers, who had come to study what they called a primitive curiosity, and their judgment was swift and cool. The Velthari were the first to speak, and their words cut deep into human pride. These beings were made of living crystal, and they had existed for over 50,000 years, and they looked at human cities the way humans might look at ant hills. How charming! The Velthari ambassador had said as he toured the United Nations building. They have built little structures, and they seem to believe these matter. The Krixa were even worse in their contempt. These massive predators stood 3 meters tall, with armored skin and claws that could tear through steel, and they had conquered 6 star systems through pure biological superiority when they saw human soldiers standing guard at the summit. The Krixa War Master had laughed so hard that the sound shook windows. "These soft little creatures are your warriors?" he asked the other species. "I have eaten prey more threatening than this." But perhaps the cruelest mockery came from the Mindweavers. Of Vescent, these beings existed as pure consciousness housed in floating crystalline shells, and they could read thoughts and emotions across vast distances. When they tried to scan human minds, they found something that confused and amused them. "We cannot detect them," the Mindweaver Prime announced to the Concord. "Their thoughts are so simple and so quiet that our senses cannot register them as true consciousness, and I propose we classify them as semi-sentient at best." The other species agreed, and humanity was granted what the Concord called observer status in their galactic community. This was not an honor, but an insult wrapped in diplomatic language. Observer status meant humans could watch but not participate, and they could trade, but only for scraps, and they could travel, but only on routes that other species did not want. The Concord gave humanity permission to settle 12 worlds on the outer edges of explored space. And these were the worst worlds available. One was a frozen rock where temperatures never rose above -40, and another was a desert where water had to be extracted from stones, and a third was so close to its sun that colonists could only work at night. But humanity accepted these gifts with gratitude and smiles, and this confused the other species greatly. "Why did they not protest?" asked the Velthari ambassador after one particularly insulting summit where humans had been seated in a separate room and fed through a slot in the door. "Because they know their place," answered the Krixa War Master. "Even animals understand when they are outmatched." The Mindweaver Prime offered a different theory that was somehow even more insulting. "They do not protest because they do not understand that they should, and their minds are too simple to recognize an insult." And so the centuries passed and the mockery never stopped. Human ambassadors were made to wait for days before being granted meetings that lasted only minutes, and human trade ships were searched and delayed at every checkpoint while other species passed freely. Human cultural achievements were collected by the Concord and displayed in museums under categories like primitive art and pre-sentient expressions, and visitors would walk past human paintings and music and literature and laugh at how simple it all was. The Krixa developed a popular entertainment program where comedians would imitate human behavior, and the most popular sketches involved humans trying to understand technology and failing in ridiculous ways. The Velthari wrote academic papers about humanity with titles like "The Limits of Evolution" and "Why Some Species Should Remain Confined to Their Birth World." The Mindweavers continued their experiments and studies, and every few decades they would publish new findings that proved humans were barely conscious at all. And through all of this, humanity smiled and nodded and said, "Thank you." They signed unfair treaties and accepted terrible trade deals and bowed their heads when other species demanded respect. When a Krixa raider destroyed a human colony ship in 2298 and killed 40,000 innocent people. Humanity filed a formal complaint and asked politely for an investigation. The investigation concluded that the humans had probably provoked the attack somehow, and no punishment was given when Veltri corporations manipulated markets to bankrupt 3 human worlds. Humanity sent diplomatic notes expressing concern and asking for future consideration. The Veltri did not even bother to respond when Mindweaver researchers conducted experiments on human prisoners without consent. Humanity protested through official channels and requested that such activities be reviewed. The Concord ruled that since humans were only semi-sentient, normal ethical rules did not apply, and still humanity smiled, and still humanity endured. But something was happening that the other species did not see and could not understand. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin was born in 2289 on the frozen colony world of New Helsinki, and she grew up hearing stories of Earth and the mockery and the centuries of humiliation. She joined the human fleet at age 18 and rose through the ranks with a speed that surprised her superiors, and by age 40, she commanded the largest human battle group in existence. This was not saying much because the human fleet was small and poorly equipped, and the Concord had placed strict limits on what weapons humanity was allowed to possess, but Admiral Chen did not care about the size of her fleet or the quality of her weapons. She cared about something else entirely. Every night, she would sit in her quarters and read reports and study data, and she filled thousands of pages with notes that she shared with no one. She was learning. She was learning everything the galaxy had to teach about technology and tactics and biology and psychology, and she was finding the patterns that no one else could. Seeing her private journal, she wrote words that would later become famous throughout human space. They laugh because they see our weakness, and they do not see that we have made weakness into patience and patience into purpose. Admiral Chen was not alone in her studies across human space. In laboratories and workshops and universities that the Concord considered too primitive to monitor, humans were working and learning and building. They asked questions that seemed stupid, and the other species answered without thinking. They requested technology samples for educational purposes and received them with contempt. They observed and recorded and analyzed everything while appearing to understand nothing. The mockery continued, but now it served a purpose. Every insult taught humanity something new about their enemies, and every humiliation revealed another weakness to exploit. The Concord saw submission, but they were looking at something else entirely. They were looking at patience. They were looking at purpose. They were looking at the slow and careful preparation for something that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. But that day was still far in the future, and for now humanity continued to smile and bow and say thank you, and they waited. The galaxy believed it understood humanity perfectly, and this belief would prove to be the greatest mistake in recorded history. Every species in the Concord had studied humans and analyzed their behavior, and reached the same conclusion that humans were simply cowards. The evidence seemed overwhelming and impossible to argue against when Krixer raiders attacked human ships. Humans retreated instead of fighting back, and when Veltri merchants cheated human traders, humans accepted the losses quietly, and when Mindweavers insulted human intelligence, humans smiled and agreed that yes, perhaps they were not very smart. Krixer Warmaster spoke for all the Concord when he declared his judgment at a summit in 2356. Humans lack the basic courage required for survival in this galaxy, and it is only our mercy that allows them to continue existing, and we should be grateful that they recognize this and behave accordingly. The other species nodded in agreement, because what else could explain human behavior except pure and simple cowardice? But the Krixer Warmaster was wrong, and so was every being in the Concord who agreed with him. They did not understand what they were looking at because they had never seen anything like it before on the human colony of New Oslo. An old woman named Grandmother Yuki gathered her grandchildren around her and told them a story that every human child learned by heart. Long ago, she began, there was a family living in a small house, and one day, a giant came to their door, and the giant was cruel and mean and loved to hurt people smaller than himself. The children listened with wide eyes because they knew this story was about more than giants. The giant demanded that the family give him food and gold and the father of. The family looked at his children, and he looked at his wife, and he thought about fighting back, but he knew that the giant would kill them all if he tried. Grandmother Yuki paused, and her old eyes were wet with memories, so the father smiled. The giant and gave him what he wanted, and the giant laughed and called the father a coward and left, and the family survived. She leaned forward, and her voice became fierce despite her age. But here's what the giant never understood, and what you must never forget, and what makes us who we are as a people. The children held their breath. It takes no courage to fight when you are strong, and it takes no courage to die in a hopeless battle. And any fool can throw their life away in anger. She touched her heart with her wrinkled hand. But it takes more courage than the giant could ever imagine to swallow your pride and smile at your enemy and bury your dead children and still choose to live so that one day your grandchildren might be free. This was the truth that the galaxy could not see human. Peace was not weakness, and it was not cowardice, and it was not submission. Human peace was the most extraordinary act of collective courage the universe had ever witnessed every day for 300 years. Humanity chose to endure suffering that would have broken any other species when Krixa raiders killed their families. Humans did not scream for revenge, but instead comforted each other and rebuilt and remembered every name and every face when Veltari corporations destroyed their economies. Humans did not riot, but instead worked harder and found new ways to survive and wrote down every injustice in books that would never be forgotten. When Mindweavers declared them non-sentient, humans did not argue, but instead proved their sentience. Through art and music and love and kindness that asked nothing in return. This was courage beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined. Elder statesman Marcus Okonkwo was 112 years old when he called his family together for what he knew would be his final teaching. He had served humanity for 90 years as a diplomat, and had smiled at beings who had murdered his brother and shaken hands with species who had enslaved his cousins and signed treaties that he knew were unfair. Because the alternative was extinction, his children and grandchildren gathered around his bed, and he spoke slowly because his strength was fading. They call us cowards, he said, and I want you to understand why they are wrong. He closed his eyes and remembered centuries of pain. We are not peaceful because we are weak, and we are not peaceful because we are afraid, and we are not peaceful because we do not understand what they have done to us. His eyes opened and burned with an inner fire. We are peaceful because we are strong enough to wait and strong enough to endure and strong enough to remember every single name of every single person they have taken from us. He reached out and took his youngest grandson's hand. Our courage is what holds this galaxy together. Because if we stop being brave enough to accept peace, there would be war, and the war would be terrible beyond imagination. Marcus Okonkwo died that night, but his words lived on in the hearts of every human who heard them. And still the Concord did not understand. They watched humans accept insult after insult, and they laughed at what they believed was cowardice, and they never realized that they were watching something else entirely. They were watching a species make an impossible choice every single day. Every human who smiled at a Krixa warrior was choosing peace over revenge, and that choice took more strength than any battle. Every human who negotiated with a Veltari merchant was choosing survival over pride, and that choice took more courage than any war. Every human who endured a Mindweaver insult was choosing hope over despair, and that choice took more bravery than any heroic last stand. But courage is not infinite, is a resource like any other, and it can be spent, and it can be exhausted, and when it runs out, something else takes its place. Admiral Chen Wei-lin understood this better than anyone. She was now 127 years old, and human medicine had advanced far beyond what the Concorde knew, and she had watched 3 centuries of human suffering from her position in the fleet. In her private moments, she wrote in her journal, and her words grew darker with each passing year. We have given everything to peace, and we have paid every price, and we have buried every child and smiled at every murderer, and I do not know how much longer we can continue. She was not the only one who felt the exhaustion creeping into human souls across human space. People were growing tired in a way that sleep could not cure. They still smiled, but the smiles were becoming harder to maintain, and they still accepted insults, but the acceptances were becoming hollow and mechanical. The courage that had held humanity together for 300 years was beginning to crack, and somewhere in the depths of human space, in laboratories and shipyards that the Concorde did not know existed, preparations were being completed for the day when courage finally ran out. That day was coming soon. The galaxy just did not know it yet. The colony of New Geneva was a beautiful world that humans had transformed from a barren rock into a garden paradise over 200 years of hard work. Mountains rose in the north, where snow fell softly in winter, and rivers flowed through green valleys where children played and laughed and dreamed of futures among the stars. 15,000 children lived on New Geneva, and they attended schools where they learned about Earth and about the Concorde and about humanity's place in the galaxy. They were taught to be polite to other species, and to smile even when insulted, and to have courage enough to endure anything for the sake of peace. These children trusted the adults who taught them, and they believed that if they were good enough and patient enough, the galaxy would eventually accept them as equals. They were innocent and hopeful, and they had done nothing wrong. And then the Mindweavers came. Mindweaver scientist was named Zelkathos, and he had spent his career trying to prove that humans were not truly conscious beings. His previous experiments had been conducted on adult humans, and the results have been inconclusive because adult human minds were too complex and too guarded to study easily. But children were different. Children were open and trusting, and their minds had not yet learned to hide their true nature. Exelathos proposed a new study to the Mindweaver Academy of Sciences, and his proposal was approved without any consultation with humanity or any other species. He would study human children to determine once and for all whether humans experienced what he called true consciousness, or merely imitated it through biological programming. The experiment began on a quiet morning in spring. Mindweaver ships descended on New Geneva, and Zelkathos himself led the team that entered the largest school in the capital city. The children were gathered in the central courtyard, and they looked up at the floating crystalline forms with curiosity rather than fear, because they had been taught that the galaxy was their friend. Zelkathos activated his equipment and reached into their minds. What happened next would never be fully described in any official record. The experiment lasted for 6 hours, and when it was finished, every child in that courtyard was dead. Their bodies showed no physical damage, because the damage was deeper than flesh and bone. Zelkathos had torn through their minds, looking for evidence of consciousness, and in doing so, he had destroyed the very thing he was searching for. Other schools were next. By the time the Mindweaver ships left New Geneva, 15,000 children were dead, and not a single one had been spared. Zelkathos submitted his findings to the Academy with clinical detachment. The subjects did not exhibit true consciousness, he wrote. Their responses to stimuli were merely biological reflexes, and their apparent emotions were simply chemical reactions without deeper meaning. And I recommend that humans be reclassified from semi-sentient to non-sentient. The Concorde received this report and held a hearing to determine what response was appropriate. The hearing lasted 4 hours, the Velthari representatives expressed mild concern about the methodology, but agreed that the scientific value of the study was significant. The Krixa representatives laughed openly and congratulated Zelkathas on finally proving what everyone already knew. The other species offered various opinions, but none of them suggested that any serious punishment was warranted. The final ruling was delivered by the Concord High Council. Xelakos was issued a formal reprimand for procedural irregularities and fined a small sum that he could easily afford and transferred to a different research facility where he could continue his work. No compensation was offered to humanity. No apology was given. No memorial was permitted for the dead children. Message was clear, and it was the same message that the Concord had been sending for 300 years. Humans did not matter. Human lives did not matter. Human children did not matter. Admiral Chen Weilin received the news on her flagship, and for the first time in her long life, she did not know what to do. She had endured everything the galaxy had thrown at humanity with patience and purpose, and she had always believed that someday the suffering would be worth it. But this was different. This was children. This was 15,000 children who had trusted the adults in their lives to keep them safe and who had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Chen Weilin sat alone in her quarters, and she felt something inside her break. It was not anger, because anger was too small a word for what she felt. It was not grief, because grief was too soft a word for the agony that consumed her. It was the sound of courage finally running out after 300 years of impossible endurance. She called a meeting of the United Human Assembly, and every human leader in the galaxy attended either in person or through secure communications. Chen Weilin stood before them, and her face showed nothing because there was nothing left to show. For 300 years, she said, we have had the courage to endure, and the courage to forgive, and the courage to believe that peace was worth any price. Her voice was steady and calm and completely empty of hope. Today I inform this assembly that our courage is finally exhausted, and we have no more to give. She looked at the faces before her and saw the same emptiness reflected back. The galaxy believes we are cowards, and perhaps they were right in a way we did not understand, and perhaps we were afraid of what we would become if we stopped being brave enough to accept peace. She paused, and in that pause the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. But I am no longer afraid, and I do not think any of us are afraid anymore, and now the galaxy will learn what we have been protecting them from all these centuries. The vote was held immediately. No one spoke against the resolution because there were no words left to speak. The resolution passed unanimously, and it did not use the word war because humans did not think they deserved to use such a clean word for what was coming. Resolution simply stated that humanity would no longer exercise restraint in pursuit of its legitimate interests. A copy was sent to the Concord through official diplomatic channels. When the Concord High Council received this message, they laughed. The Krixa War Master made jokes about humans finally growing spines, and the Velthari ambassador wondered aloud what the primitives thought they could possibly do. The Mindweaver Prime did not even bother to read the message himself, but had an assistant summarize it for him. None of them were laughing when the first human fleet appeared in Krixa space 3 days later, and none of them would ever laugh at humanity again. The Krixa Third Fleet was the most feared military force in the known galaxy, and it had never lost a battle in 6,000 years of continuous warfare. 1,200 warships crewed by the deadliest predators in existence formed a wall of death that had crushed every enemy foolish enough to challenge Krixa supremacy. When the human fleet appeared at the edge of Krixa space, the Third Fleet's commander laughed so hard that his bridge crew became concerned for his health. Count them, he ordered between bursts of laughter. His tactical officer obeyed, and the number appeared on the main display. 347. Human vessels detected, and commander, they appear to be of unknown design. The commander waved a massive clawed hand dismissively. Unknown design means they built something new in their little hidden workshops, and it does not matter because 300 ships against 1,200 is mathematics that even humans should understand. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Attention human vessels, and I am Commander Krextol of the Krixa Third Fleet, and you have exactly 1 minute to surrender or be destroyed, and I promise to make your deaths quick as a reward for providing me with entertainment. The response came immediately, and it was not what anyone expected. A human woman's face appeared on the screen, and she was old and calm, and her eyes contained absolutely nothing that the Krixa recognized as emotion. I am Admiral Chun Wei-Lin of the United Human Fleet, and we decline your offer, and we have a counter-proposal. Krextol leaned forward with amusement. And what proposal could primitives possibly make that would interest me, Admiral? Chun smiled, and it was not a human smile, but something colder and older and more terrible. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. The Krixa bridge erupted in laughter. That echoed through every ship in the fleet. Krextol was still laughing when he gave the order to attack. The Krixa Third Fleet surged forward with the confidence of 6,000 years of victory behind them, and their weapons powered up, and their targeting systems locked onto the pathetically small human force. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for thousands of years. The human ships did not move like any vessels the Krixa had ever seen. They did not fly in formation or follow predictable patterns, but instead moved as a single organism that flowed around Krixa attacks like water around stones. Krixa weapons that should have torn human ships apart struck empty space as human vessels danced away at the last possible moment, and then the humans fired back. The weapons they used had no names in any Krixa database because they were technologies that humanity had developed in secret over 3 centuries of hidden research beams of pure white light cut through Krixa shields as if they did not exist because human scientists had spent 200 years studying Krixa shield technology and finding the exact frequency that would bypass it completely. Missiles that moved faster than any Krixa sensor could track struck weak points in Krixa armor that no one had ever discovered because human analysts had examined millions of hours of Krixa combat footage and identified structural vulnerabilities that the Krixa themselves did not know about. Commander Krextol watched in growing horror as his invincible fleet began to die ship after ship exploded as human weapons found their marks with perfect precision, and the Krixa could not land a single hit. In return, how is this possible? He roared at his tactical officer. The answer came not from his officer, but from Admiral Chun, whose face appeared once again on his screen. You spent 300 years teaching us your weaknesses, and we were excellent students. Krextol felt something he had never experienced before in his life. He felt fear. All ships read. He ordered, and his voice cracked in a way that would have been shameful under any other circumstances. But the human ships were faster than anything the Krixa possessed, and there was no escape. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Krixa's Third Fleet no longer existed. 1,200 warships had been reduced to debris, and the feared warriors who crewed them floated dead in the cold void of space. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel. News of the battle spread across the galaxy at the speed of light, and then faster, as terrified communications officers used every method available to warn their governments. The Concord High Council convened an emergency session, and for the first time in recorded history, there was no laughter when humanity was discussed. How did they do this? The Valkyrie ambassador demanded, and his crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated extreme distress. Intelligence reports were presented, and each one was more shocking than the last. Human shipyards had been discovered, hidden in the chromosphere of their sun, where temperatures made them invisible to standard sensors, and these shipyards had been operating for over a century. Human weapons laboratories had been found buried beneath their colony worlds, and these Laboratories had produced technologies that the Concord's best scientists could not understand. Human communication networks had been intercepted and revealed to be running through artificial intelligences so advanced that they made the Mindweaver's psionic abilities look like children's toys. But the most terrifying revelation came from captured Krixa escape pods whose occupants were interrogated about the battle. The humans had known every move the Krixa would make before they made it. They had anticipated every tactic and countered it before it was even attempted, and they had fought with a coordination that no species had ever achieved. The Mindweaver Prime reached out with his consciousness to touch the human fleet that now sat motionless at the edge of Concord space. What he found made him withdraw in terror. "They are connected," he whispered to the silent council chamber. "Every human in that fleet is linked together in a way that I cannot fully comprehend, and they think as one mind while remaining individuals. And this should be impossible, but they have done it." The council sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. For 300 years, they had mocked a species that was quietly becoming the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever seen. For 300 years, they had taught that species everything about their technologies and tactics and weaknesses. For 300 years they had believed they were dealing with primitives, while those primitives were building weapons that could destroy everything the Concord had ever built. Admiral Chun's face appeared on the council's main screen, and every being in the chamber flinched. "You have 2 standard days to surrender unconditionally," she said with no emotion in her voice. "If you do not surrender, we will continue through Concord space until there is nothing left, and we have waited 300 years for this moment, and we are prepared to wait no longer." The screen went dark. Council argued for 18 hours about what to do, but everyone knew there was only one possible response. The Krixa declared that they would fight to the last warrior, but their declaration rang hollow after the destruction of their greatest fleet. The Velthari proposed negotiations, but could not explain what they had to offer that humanity would want. The Mindweaver Prime remained silent, because he had seen something in the human fleet that he would never speak of. He had seen 300 years of accumulated rage held in perfect check by iron discipline, and he knew that nothing in the galaxy could stand against it. War had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The war lasted 11 months, and it was not the kind of war the galaxy had ever seen before. Human fleets moved through Concord space, like ghosts that appeared without warning and struck without mercy and vanished before any response could be organized. The Krixa homeworlds fell in 6 weeks. The great predators who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia found themselves facing an enemy they could not fight and could not understand and could not defeat. Human ground forces landed on their breeding worlds, and the Krixa warriors charged to meet them with claws and teeth and 6,000 years of warrior tradition. They died in waves. Human soldiers wore armor that Krixa claws could not penetrate and carried weapons that killed from distances. The Krixa could not close and moved with a coordination that made the great predators look like confused animals by the end of the first month. The Krixa War Master, who had laughed at humans for so many years, knelt before Admiral Chun and offered his sword in surrender. "How?" he asked with genuine confusion in his voice. "You were supposed to be weak and we were supposed to be strong. And how did everything become the opposite of what it should be?" Admiral Chun took his sword and looked at it for a long moment before answering. "You saw our gentleness and called it weakness, and you saw our patience and called it cowardice, and you saw our love for peace and called it fear." She handed the sword to an aide and met the War Master's eyes. "You never understood that the same qualities that made us accept your mockery for 300 years also made us dangerous beyond your comprehension." The Velthari fell next. Their crystalline homeworld had existed for 50,000 years, and in all that time, no enemy had ever breached its Orbital defenses human ships arrived and passed through those defenses as if they were not there because human scientists had spent centuries studying Velthury crystal technology and had developed countermeasures that the Velthury could not even detect. The Velthury Council of Elders surrendered without a fight when they realized that resistance was not just futile, but meaningless. Their technology that they had believed was the most advanced in the galaxy was now obsolete, and the species they had mocked as primitives had surpassed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. But the fall of the Mindweavers was different, Admiral. Chun had special plans for the species that had killed 15,000 children on New Geneva. Human forces did not destroy the Mindweaver homeworld, or kill their leaders, or burn their cities. Instead, they did something far worse. Human scientists had developed technology that could interface with Mindweaver consciousness, and this technology was now deployed across the entire Mindweaver species. Every Mindweaver in existence was forced to experience what the children of New Geneva had experienced in their final moments. They felt the fear and confusion of young minds being torn apart by forces they could not understand. They felt the pain of consciousness being shredded. Layer by layer, they felt the desperate longing for parents who could not save them. They felt everything for 6 hours, because that was how long the experiment on New Geneva had lasted. When it was over, the Mindweavers were changed forever. They could no longer claim that humans lacked true consciousness, because they had felt human consciousness from the inside, and they knew it was as real and as deep and as worthy of respect as their own. Sikothos, the scientist who had conducted the original experiment, did not survive the experience, and no one mourned him. The other 9 species of the Concord surrendered before human forces reached their borders, because they had seen what happened to those who resisted, and they had no desire to share that fate. And then something unexpected happened. The galaxy had expected humanity to become the new tyrants, and to treat the conquered species the way they themselves had been treated for 3 centuries. They expected humiliation and mockery and exploitation and casual cruelty. They expected revenge. But Admiral Chun stood before the first session of the new Galactic Assembly and announced something that shocked every species in attendance. Humanity claims no special status in this new order, and we will hold exactly 1 vote in this assembly, the same as every other species, and we will follow the same rules and accept the same limitations. The representatives of the conquered species stared in disbelief. We did not go to war because we wanted to rule the galaxy. Chum continued. We went to war because we wanted to be treated as equals, and because we were denied that basic dignity for 300 years. She paused and looked at each representative in turn. Now that equality has been established through the only means you left available to us. We have no further territorial ambitions, and we will not mock you or humiliate you, or experiment on your children to prove points about your consciousness. The Velthury ambassador raised a crystalline limb and asked the question everyone was thinking. Why, and after everything we did to you, why would you show us mercy when we showed you none? Admiral Chun smiled, and this time it was a human smile full of warmth and sadness and hope. Because we remember who we were before you exhausted our courage, and we remember the dream we held for 300 years that someday we would be part of a galaxy where all species were treated with dignity. She spread her hands to encompass the entire assembly. That dream never died, and it will never die, and we refuse to become the monsters you tried to make us. The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then the Krixa, War Master who had surrendered his sword to Chun, rose and spoke. You have defeated us in battle, and you have shown us mercy we did not deserve, and you have proven that everything we believed about your species was wrong. He bowed his massive head in a gesture of respect that Krixa rarely showed to anyone. I do not know if we can ever earn your forgiveness, but I swear on my honor that the Krixa will spend the rest of our existence trying. One by one, the other species rose and made similar pledges. The new Galactic Assembly began its work, and for the first time in history, every species was treated as equal. 500 years later, human children learn about the Mockery era and the 11-month war in their history classes. They learn about the courage of their ancestors, not the courage to fight, but the courage to endure for 3 centuries without losing their souls. They learn about Admiral Chen Wei-lin, who became the first human to serve as Speaker of the Galactic Assembly, and who spent her final years teaching that revenge was hollow, but justice was eternal. And in every species across the galaxy, there is a proverb that parents teach their children from their earliest days. Treat humans with respect, and not because they are strong, because everyone knows they are strong, but because they are kind. The proverb always ends with a warning that has never been forgotten. And if you exhaust their kindness, then you will have to face their strength. The galaxy learned its lesson. Humanity finally found peace, not the false peace of endurance and submission, but the true peace of equals who respect each other and build something beautiful together among the stars. This is how the story ends, not with conquest or revenge or eternal war, but with hope. And that is the most human ending of all.